Hi, I'm Bill Kristol. Welcome to Conversations, and welcome back to Mike Murphy.
Thank you.
Previous converser on Conversations.
We're back at it.
We're back at it a couple of weeks after the 2018 election.
Yeah. Shocker, it went badly. Heard here was predicted.
Yeah, I think pretty much went the way you predicted, right?
Yeah, I think anybody who knows anything about politics could have predicted this. Let's see. Unpopular president, tone-deaf Congress, and independents hate us. I saw the coverage.
And the normal off-year reaction.
Right. Yeah, exactly. That's part of it. But all this coverage about, the intensities creeped up 1%, and, it was all noise. It was pretty obvious. We were heading for this, and we took the beating.
Okay, we being the Republicans in this case.
Yeah, I'm still in it.
You and I are still in
We're
it.
fighting from within.
I know.
Caucus of 11.
Yeah, but good. It's good. It's a good 11.
My problem is I can't, some people in my world or my business have switched over, but that means you have to be for the policy. That's
of the Democrats, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
They don't want if Bloomberg's a nominee, that's a different story. But
Okay, so let's do that. We've been through a lot of midterms, and of course, people often get midterms wrong, or they don't predict what happens 2 years later, or things reverse.
Well, the Obama example,
happen.
He lost 63 seats in the House,
right.
And fewer than we did. They had a worse time in the Senate, and he had the marvelous comeback. So will it be the same for?
So what happens? What going forward? What are the implications for 2020 broadly for both parties, for Trump, and then for each party? So let's go through it.
Well, having gotten the Trump election wrong, my crystal ball has a huge crack in it. But I'll try because I think it's not too hard to figure out under the rules of generally how politics have worked. The folks who got thumped, as President George W. Bush once said in the midterm, they adjust. I don't think Trump's capable of adjusting. I think he's the atomic clock of being Trump.
Right.
So, in fact, I think he'll double down on his Trumpness, and he has the pressure of the Mueller thing coming too. So I don't think Trump changes his course. So I don't see independents swinging back at all, at least in the numbers he wins. He needs to win. I think he will erode a little in the Republican world because increasingly it'll be clear, though I'm not sure how clear, it ought to be very clear, that he's political anthrax, and we go to the ballot with him again, we're going to have trouble because he won't change and improve. Now, maybe there's an intervening event, some foreign affairs crisis that he, reach for it, handles appropriately. The Democrats are drunk on identity politics, so they are capable of nominating a candidate that even Trump could beat. So there's a lot of loose stuff, but I think it's kind of out of Trump's hands. I think he'll still be awful. His problems will compound. And the fact that now the Democrats have real power in Washington, is a threat to him, and he'll handle that badly and I think make his problems worse. And finally, you look at the Electoral College map, the industrial Midwest, that he, to his credit, pulled the real rabbit out of the hat, winning states like Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. We have not carried in a presidential since the 80s. Add to that how Amendment 4 works out in Florida with felons being able to vote. You can make arguments on either side of that equation. Conventional wisdom is it will be a thumb on the scale for the Democrats, though I say the bright hope there is Eric can vote for his dad. Cheap shot, I know, but that'll be the only one.
Yeah.
I think, and the demographic headwinds, the younger voters who become voters during the Trump era are not breaking for Trump. Well, the older voters who've liked Trump, it's narrowing in the data, and some of them are moving on to the MAGA palace in the sky. You add all that up, I think he has more headwinds than he did the day he was elected.
Right.
So I would say to the party, we're riding a very slow horse here.
Okay, so what can change? Democrats are in charge of the House. That could affect a bunch of things over the next year. Plus, they do have these primaries and 30 candidates, and candidates still matter, as we saw with Hillary Clinton.
Yeah.
And there are scenarios where Trump benefits a lot from that. So walk us through that.
I have a contrarian view, and I don't know I'm right, but generally things that are disrupted, the people inside the disrupted system are among the last to do it. A lot of confirmation bias. So I think the Democratic nomination process will be different this time. And here's my pitch on why I think. And again, totally capable of being wrong. The traditional model, we all know it. 1 million people run when it's worth having. In an open seat like they have. They all go to the early funnel states, Iowa, New Hampshire, and to some extent South Carolina, and the field is narrowed down. And you want to win those early states, not because you get any delegates, but because you get an amazing amount of coverage from the national media, which makes you famous in states down the line because you don't have money to advertise in those places. It attracts excitement, which attracts more money. The horse race polls go up, more money, and you hope for a compounding thing, and off you go to the nomination.
And the race narrows to 2 or 3.
2 or 3.
For quickly in both parties. This is the scenario in the past in both parties.
Right, in both parties it's been a scenario. If you win, you keep winning, because winning attracts fame. Fame drives vote later. Basically, the media gives you a huge gift of $100 million worth of attention, and you attract more money. So that's the traditional one, with the key difference of we mean social Darwin Republicans are winner-take-all in our primaries. So we murder them quick.
Some of them,
Yeah, the bulk, though. We are much more a winner-take-all process than the Dems, who, cried when Old Yeller died, so it's proportional. Everybody gets a trophy. They can go on forever. So this time on the Democratic thing, you're going to have 35, maybe 40 million Americans who are deeply interested in the Democratic primary process and may participate. Last time, I think about 31 million people voted. I think that market has grown. And they're deeply anti-Trump, and they're deeply interested in taking power back. So I'm not sure in a time of streaming media and the social media, the internet, all the ways we have to get famous for free, they're going to say, all right, the Iowa caucus is over. I'm not for Beto/Jesus anymore. Because the most interesting thing he did, besides do quite well for a Democrat in Texas, was he created a TV show and a TV channel on streaming media that he didn't have to spend any money to buy, where people followed the interesting Beto content nearly every day. So I have a feeling with the proportional representation, 4 or 5 candidates with a compelling message, which is always the hard part, might create a Beto-like daily TV show. And why cancel the show after Iowa? Keep going. As long as you're raising money because you have this mass group and you create your own messaging platform where you don't need wall-to-wall cable TV coverage, even though you get that anyway, I don't think you have to collapse that quickly.
And the voters you don't think necessarily run to the top 2 or 3.
No, I think it'll be the 2 to 5 with the best viral messaging that they can pump out on an extremely regular basis and extract low-dollar internet donations to fund it. Kind of like Bernie did last time, though he didn't do the viral part.
Right.
They could go a while. And with proportional, who really gets knocked out? So I see the Democrat thing potentially as being much less reliant on, we're on CNN tomorrow night because we just won the New Hampshire primary. Now, if you finish 18th, yeah.
Right.
But if you're in that top group, they could keep going for a while, particularly if it's silos, where you're going to have the white liberal generational candidate, a Beto type, maybe Beto. You're going to have the traditional liberal candidate who might be older and less adept at social media. You're probably going to have the great fighter, the winner, a Mitch Landrieu type, who I think is a political talent, is Bill Clinton level. And then you're going to have identity politics candidates. If you put a gun to my head right now, I would try to run away. But if I couldn't, to make a prediction, Kamala Harris is holding a lot of cards. She can link generational feminist, African-American together in an identity politics crazed primary. There's a whole silo there, maybe 2 candidates like that. You've got Elizabeth Warren, who's a fighter, white liberal. That's a segment. And then maybe some famous, like Trump pre-aware title, a Kardashian, I'm only half joking, runs. Right. So there's room for a bunch to be self-perpetuating through the primaries. So I don't believe it'll be a quick, sudden death after 3 or 4 primaries.
Yeah, that's interesting. And, in retrospect, Trump won in 2016 and knocked people out, a lot of them suddenly, and then some, one by one. So that's the narrative one remembers. But, of course, in a certain way, even 2016 had a little bit of that character.
It did.
Trump, Rubio, Kasich, Cruz, they were all in for fair. Trump
they had enough money, but our winner-take-all thing kind of quickly kills.
Collapses
and it was the old money model. Nobody really raised low-dollar, massive money in our primary last time.
But you're right. If March 15th isn't winner-take-all, not just Cruz and Kasich stay in, but maybe Rubio stays in, maybe even 1 or 2 others who have sort of particular identities.
Our world's a little different, one, because they're probably, I'm still not sure Trump completes the term, but if he does, it's very hard to beat an incumbent president, even a flawed one with trouble. And, the data on Trump, and we don't really know since the election if it's declined. I think it will over the next 90 days, but it won't decline enough that he'll look vulnerable. And the history is pretty full of people who've tried, and it's just hard to do. Now, to do it, I think you'd need a very different kind of campaign.
What are we on now? Now we're on the
Republicans.
Because let's stay with the Democrats just for a minute, because I think that's interesting. So what about the Democrats? Ron Brownstein describes it as a kind of candidate of half the candidates are reassurance candidates, the other half are mobilization. candidates or
Right.
anger or outrage candidates or something like resistance candidates, as opposed to, I understand why you voted for Trump, and there were some legitimate issues even there, but you need to now come back to us. Joe Biden, let's say, would be that, presumably, right?
Right.
So what do you think the balance of power is in the party, and who fits in what category?
At the top of the party, it's always reasonable, sly, schemers. At the bottom of the party, it's rage. Rage beats policy papers in the age of Trump. So if you ask of the Democratic operatives I know, and I know a bunch of them, I don't know a lot of them, but if you were to take 10 or 20 national ones and put them in a room and shoot them full of truth serum and ask what one voter group inside the Democratic primary would you like to dominate, they would say African American women. Mm-hmm. The way I look at it, and this is all kind of dumb shorthand, but look at it like three overlapping piles of vote in the Democrat presidential primary. White liberals, people who resonate to feminism as a message, first female president or gender identity, and voters of color. And if you can put 2 out of 3 together, you're in pretty good shape. I mean, Hillary was able to put the feminist urge and people of color together against Bernie, who was cornered with white liberals. Going back, Obama was able to put people of color and white liberals together against Hillary, who had that power, which is strong, of feminism in the party. So looking at that analysis, who can put 2 things together? Well, Elizabeth Warren arguably could, white liberals in the feminist pile. Kamala Harris, color, feminism, maybe even white liberals, a triple header. And then, you can kind of, Biden looks to me like, based on name ID now, not a lot else. He's not generational. He's kind of a second banana by nature, but he is a fighter, which may become the fourth dimension they want. I've said Mitch Landrieu, I think, is a Bill Clinton-esque talent. He's generational. He's from the South. I think he could do well with voters of color. I think he could do well with white liberals who want a fighter, even though he's not that liberal himself. He'll have ideological wounds there. And then to me, Bloomberg's interesting because under the traditional rules of the Democratic nominating process, he doesn't have much of a constituency. But the ability to last and the ability to say, I'm the only grown-up in the room, how'd you like to win? There's some power there, I think. It'll be contrarian, but he owns a 7-Up. In a world of all these colas, he's 7-Up. He's got a unique thing. So it'll either blow up on the pad or it'll work, if they're brave enough to run that campaign. I think he's, disclaimer, I've worked for him in the past. I think he's probably thinking about it.
Yeah, that's my sense.
So the other thing will be opportunities and mishaps will be created over the next year by the Democrats in Congress, now that they have the majority.
Yeah, I'll talk about
and
that
maybe
a
a young star will be created, some
Right.
crusading, congressman or something who
Or if there are
fights the
impeachment
grassroots.
hearings and someone who's incredibly Barbara Jordan-like in the Nixon hearings
exactly,
or whatever, right?
Exactly. It'll be a big platform.
How dangerous is it for the Democrats that they control the House, and how much of an opportunity is it?
Well, that's a very good question. It's kind of like a chainsaw. You can do great good or great damage with one. I think their leadership is pretty sane. They ran a disciplined campaign. They ran on pre-existing conditions, which is now the slogan of the Democratic Party. They like to say they ran on Obamacare. I don't think any of them ever said it. There was like a $1,000 penalty.
Right.
But they're going to take away the most popular thing in your health care. That was a good message, and when people were out to punish Republicans anyway, particularly in the suburbs. So if they show the discipline, which may not be possible, but in governing that they showed in the campaign, I think they will do some good. I think they knew in the campaign, not really at the Senate level where I think they made a bunch of mistakes, but at the House level, they knew to keep it about the opponent too. So if they can use the Congress to grab a middle-class economic agenda and help the president do damage to himself, which he seems to be gifted at politically, my guess is they'll be quite happy they won the House when they roll into 2020. I do believe nothing will get done because the incentives are for both parties to use the government dialogue in Washington to fuel their presidential campaigns. One of the great problems now of our democracy is it never ends. Right. Nobody ever has any time to govern. Now,
Especially
some people
in
think...
this context, don't you think?
Oh, yeah.
Democrats, the single best thing they think is honestly they can do for governance is get rid of Trump. So, I mean, there's what's the point of passing some...
Yeah, and we have this politics now where, as we've said, I think last time we spoke, I'm right, you're evil. So all tactics are okay against you and everything you say is a lie. Trump does that, and they're learning from him. And so the institutions are the ones that get, wiped out. So I know it's kind of grim stuff. I think
And
it's going to be the Kavanaugh hearings for a year.
Well, what about them? Do you think? What if Clarence Thomas was thinking that this resigns in the summer of 19 to give a Republican president, a Republican Senate a chance to confirm a younger conservative justice?
And then we're have it again. I wouldn't be surprised if Gillibrand, one of the 20 possible candidates, somebody decides to impeach Kavanaugh or try to litigate the Supreme Court choice backwards as a presidential.
Right.
And she already wiped out Al Franken, so why not widen the scope a little bit?
And also expand the size of the Supreme Court, don't you think? Can't let McConnell and Trump shape the future for 25 years. I mean, I think don't you think people generally are underestimating how much of a market there'll be for certain things that are outside the conventional wisdom right now, at least, in liberal or democratic circles?
We've normally held the thing together, not by some law of how you operate in politics, but by accepted norms of, good elite behavior. And those are being torn apart by Trump because he's going to generate impersonators. And in the I'm right, you're evil equation, you can give yourself a pass to do almost anything because you're fighting evil.
And the Mueller report, do you think that really...
who
knows what, I mean...
Well, the problem is, and this gets, when we talk about the Republican potential primary, Trump is the first president in modern era that is shame-proof. Even Nixon could be shamed.
Right.
Shame has no impact on Trump. So things that would rock an administration to pieces in the past, Trump are just like, we need to come up with a new twist for the TV show. Right. So the Mueller report in the past would be an atomic weapon. It would wipe somebody out. Hell, the accusations might have been enough. Now, and Clinton put a few of the seeds in this with his shamelessness, but Trump has taken it to a magnificently higher level. I think if the family could be in real legal jeopardy, and the business could be in any kind of jeopardy, and the party comes around to the reality, not the. A year ago, folks like us were saying, he's a political disaster, and we were getting tisk-tisk, and you should see the rallies, Mike. Yeah. Or he did really well in Macomb County, much better than we did. He's magic. He's Rasputin. He can't be killed. Well, now we went out and got clobbered in an election that was clearly a referendum on Trump. But he's hung on to some of that still. But if that cloud evaporates, and Mueller is bad for the family, and the business is in jeopardy, and he thinks he's going to lose, and he feels Republican trouble, then maybe he'll engineer some way where he's still in charge. I'll pick I'm going to endorse the winner.
Yeah.
My guess, though,
but doesn't run. Yeah.
Yeah, he doesn't. That's the doesn't run scenario. Though I think he's got one other trick up his sleeve, which is because he's a reality game show TV producer at heart, he wants to dominate the media news. So what's the biggest thing the Trump show could do to get the attention off Mueller, off Democratic investigations that the media would, of course, fall for hook, line, and sinker? The cliffhanger. New vice president.
Yeah.
A reality show. Will it be Nikki Haley, general, somebody we haven't heard about, flame-throwing congressman, and he puts that show on.
Right.
Now, Pence, who has made the Faustian deal, will probably be very unhappy, but it's in Trump's interest to shake it up and have his own huge narrative to clog up all the chattering on cable. And I think Trump probably thinks with his 1950s Queens outlook, apparently the ladies don't like me. Get abroad, in his mind.
Right.
So if I were Nikki, I would continue the hiding pattern and, vanish for a while, because the worst thing you could do for her would, I think, be pick her. Anyway, so we'll see, but more twists and turns. And the biggest question for me on the Democratic side is, do they go for an identity politics candidate, a mobilization strategy? Because all I know is, for all the excitement about Andrew Gillum, who did a great job, by the way, came very close as a candidate, if they'd nominated Gwen Graham, she'd be governor of Florida right now.
So do you think it's pretty unambiguously clear that the reassurance strategy is better than the mobilization strategy for the Democrats?
Yeah, there's just no passion for it in the grassroots, which means it's probably dead.
Right.
The smart political types spend a lot of time in D.C. explaining the smart move, but this is, political primaries are armies without generals.
Right.
They hear the pitch from everybody and they move. I mean, a lot of us had all kinds of smart ideas for the Republican Party in 16. They wanted the guy from the reality show who fired Gilbert Gottfried because, damn it, he was going to shake things up and he was going to build a wall. And he finally told the truth about those Mexicans. You know, like a wildfire, it spread. And all the fancy polling and 100 million. I'm the idiot who blew 100 million on Jeb. All that stuff meant nothing. They didn't want what we were selling. They didn't want Kasich. They didn't want us. They didn't want Marco. You know, they wanted Trump, and they got him. That's how it works.
And the Democratic equivalent of that, you think, is more likely younger generation, maybe women, maybe African American.
Yeah, it just seems to be pretty powerful to me.
Not Joe Biden or not in this.
Yeah, Biden's a good war horse, but yesteryear, you know.
Or some moderate, you know, Hickenlooper or Michael Bennett, you know.
I want to fall in love with the moderate scenario because I'm not a communist or socialist or democratic socialist, but what's Michael Bennett's pitch? I can do well among suburban women.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. How about we make history of Kamala Harris? Again, I think the energy will be in an exciting identity politics candidate. But Mitch Landrieu, who's a winner, you know, if you ask the computer about this, it says generally when the Democrats nominate a Southern white Protestant, with all due respect to Obama, who brilliantly won 2 campaigns, Carter, Clinton, they do really well.
Right.
And he's one I think could play in the modern primary. And then, you know, you've got others. Amy Klobuchar will be a dark horse, but she's kind of interesting. She doesn't have any of the Hillary edginess. She's right next door to Iowa. She could break through there. You know, they have some, but I think it's going to be more generational, maybe outside Washington. And the identity politics equation is going to be big.
And I think your point about if you're right about the primaries, that it doesn't, partly because of proportional representation, partly because of the new media and so forth, and new fundraising opportunities, it doesn't narrow as quickly. I guess that's hard to know which side of the party that helps exactly, but it certainly lets lesser-known candidates get better known.
It means message candidates who have a resonating message, which gives them, one, the money comes in without bundlers who care about polls, and 2, it gives them the ability to use social media without needing to spend fortunes on advertising, can last a long time. If Beto had won, he'd be the front runner, I believe.
Well, let's talk about
and
Beto.
I think he's still real.
You think he's real? I kind of do too. Why not? He got
shows
more
up
votes
with
in
his,
Texas than Hillary Clinton got. You know,
he shows up with his streaming show every day in Iowa, being Beto. They like him. They like what he sells, and he's got his national campaign was more successful than his Texas campaign. Right. So does he make it through the hard second look and everything that happens in presidential politics? I don't know, but I think I saw his letter, and I was not a donor, by the way, right-wing conspiracy buffs, but I saw his thank you email to donors. It was brilliantly done.
Is that right?
Yeah. It was all about putting the kids to bed, not the political craft speech normally they get, well, we tried, thank you. You know, it was a heartfelt thing about the night in the house. And so his thing is, I used to tell a joke about the future campaign will be somebody saying, my bumper sticker bill in these serious times is no bumper stickers at all. You know, I'm super authentic and make kind of a gimmick out of that.
Right.
He's the authentic guy. And that, I think, is powerful. Of the moderate cluster, though, to finish.
I think the counter argument, hey, he's been in Congress for whatever he has, 1 or 2 terms.
Yeah.
And he's not, you can't make someone like that president. That's kind of gone. After,
well, he's the Barack Obama of the House.
After Obama and after Trump, though, also, I think it's even double.
It's never about the past. It's about the pitch in the future. And my view is it should be about the past. I like politicians who know how to govern.
Yeah. But experience used to be a fairly good claim in American politics.
Yeah,
I guess
not
Carter
anymore.
was the counter argument. But not the last 2 or 3. Even W, you got to say, honestly, but certainly Obama and Trump.
Yeah. No,
it's not about experience.
It ain't what it used to be. On the Dems, the last point I should have made, on the moderate side, the interesting one to me is Bloomberg, not because of ideology, but because of persona.
Yeah.
As, daddy grown up. That could be interesting space. If he puts on a dashiki and campaigns of everybody else and tries to take his edges off, I don't think he'll go anywhere. But if he says, you know what, I'm the grown up, I'm going to spend $5 billion to take this cancer out of the White House, and it's a tough country to run, and I'm a tough guy. That's interesting, and nobody else in their world can say that.
And I respect you people who want something fresh and new and different and make history, but you know what? You can do that 4 years from now, right?
Right. Take a look at the appointments in my administration. You're going to be happy. But who I put on the court, blah, blah, blah. But right now, I'm the Trump killer, and I'm the grown-up. Time for daddy. maybe that's rocket fuel. I still think tough in a Democratic primary, but I think that's his best move.
So you're somewhat bullish on Bloomberg, Beto, Harris.
I think if Bloomberg runs that campaign, which takes a lot of guts, I think he might have a shot. Bloomberg's got to do the old trick of you define the job to fit you, because you can't change you.
Right.
And then I like the Kamala Harris under the traditional rules of gravity. And then Elizabeth Warren, I don't count out either. She's feisty. She's famous. White liberals and feminism, 2 out of 3. She's like a better version of Hillary in some ways.
Right.
The Repubs all say, "Oh, never," and I'm like, never is a word that ought to be banned now in this business.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
And the Republican side, I was in New Hampshire right after the primary, and there was they had a bad election night. Everyone except for the governor lost, and Republicans lost both houses. And the state's in great shape economically. Mm-hmm. Have been well governed by Republicans. So it was entirely, I think, a national erosion against Trump, especially in southern New Hampshire, which is basically
a suburb,
upscale suburbs, and then some of the polls and focus groups I've seen show more openness to replacing Trump in 2020 than one would think from the simple approval number.
Right.
People approve of Trump as against Hillary. They approve of some of the policies, some of the judges, but they're a little nervous about Trump going forward.
We've seen some of this in the USC polling too. Tribally, oh yeah, I'm for the Yankees, but would you like a different pitcher to win the World Series for the Yankees? And, half of them, which correlates to Trump. Only got, I don't remember the exact, 52% of the total Republican primary vote, like 45. It was
45.
under 50.
He and Sanders each got around 45.
Yeah, and in the last half of it, there's no competition.
Right,
it was rolling up 60%.
Mid to high 30s when it was a real race.
So, the idea that the party loves him is wrong. The idea that 40%, maybe a little less now, maybe a little more if he in combat now against Pelosi, loves him is true.
Yeah.
So how do you beat that? Again, the shame thing is the problem. In the old days, you're Gene McCarthy. You go to New Hampshire. You do better than expected, and the president's shamed out of the race.
Right.
With Trump, it'd be like, they stole the vote. They bust in people. Next, and on he goes. So you don't trip the giant. And the other problem, I think, and somebody who's sympathetic to the idea of primarying Trump, let's say you go have that. I'm sure Kasich is thinking, I was second in New Hampshire. This time I can beat him, or I can come within 1 point, and that'll trip the giant. Well, the giant's not going to do anything other than say you stole it, and it's a legal election, and go on to the next one. And the media will give you a huge push, which they will do anyway if you're running against Trump. But in our primary now, that means the enemy is for you. You're a Democratic, plot, New York Times candidate.
Right.
That doesn't help. So the push ain't what it used to be, I think, now. Flake is more interesting to me in some ways because he can legitimately come at Trump from the right, but same problem. He'll have all the wrong friends. Yeah. People like us will be for him. That doesn't win a South Carolina primary.
Yeah, Sass, Corker, Nikki Haley, all these people.
I think Nikki, my theory was that she wrote the op-ed. I think she's playing a long game. But we'll see. I think they all run if Trump doesn't run.
Right.
But taking out Trump would require the shame-proof campaign means you're in it for the first half, and you the real tragedy in this, because winner take all, you come within 4 points. It doesn't matter. The media is calling you dead based on the delegate count. So basically, you got to beat Trump early and often through Super Tuesday. You got to go win California. That's the neck breaker. Texas probably. We have a pretty front-loaded thing. So you start big, and you beat them everywhere. Or not everywhere, but you beat them a lot. And then it would tip and go because you look like a winner, which is, I think, the most important thing to anybody wishing Trump bad political health in the Republican Party is it has to permeate over the next 4 months that Trump is a disaster for the reelection.
Yeah, and I'm
struck. Political death.
Now, were you struck? And we're speaking 2 weeks after the election. Maybe it'll be different a month from now. I think actually voters, who can tell, but people I talk to, which is not representative, but there's some evidence in the polls, as you said, are a little nervous. The Yankee fans are thinking, but maybe making a trade or two wouldn't be such a good idea because we fell short this year, and I don't know, they won 2 years ago, but But I'm struck that the elected officials, certainly the federal, the congressmen and women and senators, they don't seem to be rethinking much at all. Maybe we wouldn't know because they're rethinking
I think in the Senate, where they're looking at a map that is not impossible but has its challenges in 2020, and they're watching the House guys move into smaller offices, I think there's some calculation going on there because Mitch wanted to run the hedge up even higher this year to be ready for whatever bad things could come in 2020. I think part of the problem, both of the electeds and the psyche of the party is...
And the operatives and the donors.
The operatives are pretty hopeless right now.
Yeah, well, why is that? I mean...
Well, I have one crank theory, which doesn't explain it all, but the network election night has become the Super Bowl. Buzzers, sirens, exploding cannon, it's ridiculous. And they're running against a broadcast clock, so they've got to say something important every 3 minutes. And because the media is obsessed with identity politics, which is another amplifier on that Democratic struggle, the initial races they really paid attention to were the historic African-American candidates. Abrams in Georgia, a doubleheader, female African-American winning Georgia, an old southern state like that. Andrew Gillum in Florida against DeSantis, who was kind of a stage villain in some ways. Right. And then Beto/Jesus running in Texas. And then they all started losing.
Right.
And so Trump won the TV show of election night, which reinforced this brilliant Rasputin thing Trump has done to the media and the Democrats and some Republicans that Nate Silver said he was going to lose, and he won. He's got magical powers. Right. And so people, I'm sure they were holding emergency meetings on the west side of L.A. at movie star houses. What do we do the next morning? It's a disaster, fire the D-trip. And then as we actually counted the votes, it was pretty good. It was about an A-, I think, for them. But our troops, which our polls feed off of, felt like Trump did it again.
Yeah.
So
do you think that's changing now? It feels like it's sinking in gradually.
It's starting to, but what the let's get rid of Trump movement in the Republican Party really needed was a terrible TV show where Trump is, on the floor, and didn't have that. Somebody said they ought to do now election week, do like 4 shows, on cable to kind of catch up with reality. But I think it is. We just won't know how deep that goes. But right now, there's kind of a feeling that, well, he held Florida.
Right.
And once he's on the ballot against Kamala Harris, he's going to be able to carry Wisconsin and Michigan again.
That does it.
And nothing else. He's president. Yeah, there's kind of that calculation.
Yeah.
And that's not crazy, by the way.
Right. And the donor, I mean, it is... I can't tell. I mean, obviously, there are people I talk to who really think Trump is bad for the country, and they're going to be in there to fight Trump.
Right.
But there are a lot of donors who are uncomfortable with Trump, made nervous by him. Right. Wish he weren't there, but he's there. It's not going to change. He might win.
And he's going to have on his side Democratic policy, because if the House gets in the policy business, they're going to start hauling fracking companies up. They're going to, we will see. Because that caucus is, there's some new fresh faces, but it's still pretty much a pretty lefty labor caucus. So Trump will now have the threat of Democratic policy to play in the reelect, which might slap some of those nose-holding but very happy about regulatory reform and other things, business groups and everything back into line. The interesting one is pharma, where Pelosi wants to give him a haircut, and Trump's rhetoric has wanted to give him a haircut. That could be an interesting alliance, make life a little difficult for Mitch if he has to try to stop that in the Senate.
So far, you don't see a real hemorrhaging on the Republican side, either among business support, donors,
not yet. What I see is, 2020 could be awful. He's going to get crazier, but nobody can beat him in the primaries, so we got to prop him up and survive, and what's going to happen.
Hold the Senate, I can see that coming.
Yeah.
Huge. I mean, if only we can hold the Senate, at least we can prevent terrible things from happening, and then if Trump gets lucky again, we have the bonus of some more Supreme Court picks, I suppose.
I think the kindling is dry, but they're all just watching. They're all insurance adjusters. Let's play it safe, see what happens next few months. Maybe we'll get a new Supreme Court battle, and Trump can really score with that. We're really holding North Dakota. But now the Midwestern polls, who are sitting in the volcanic ash in Michigan.
Yeah, well, let's talk about those 3 states.
A little different
for a minute.
there.
I mean, you're from Michigan, and you did a ton of work there. Wisconsin, you did.
Tommy Thompson days.
And Pennsylvania, you've done, right? So what about those?
Regionally, it's his magic region. Right. And so the question becomes
80,000 votes in those 3 states, right?
Yeah, the old math of those states were you do well upstate, but you got to do okay in the suburbs around Philadelphia, around Detroit, et cetera. The suburbs were back in this election, so it looked like a revert to mean. But I know what a lot of Republican polls, though, in Michigan having been wiped out, they're less, less excited about this.
Hopeful.
is that Trump will still drive his super margins and everywhere else, and the Democrats will nominate somebody scary enough that they can reverse the suburban thing a little bit and enough. We will see. Keep in mind that in Michigan alone, Hillary massively underperformed in Detroit. And if you're working for Cory Booker or Naval Patrick or Kamala Harris, you're going to pitch. You rerun this thing in Michigan, we'd beat Trump based on Detroit alone, where Hillary ran 75,000 votes behind Obama. And you catch, remember, it was a 10,000 vote election. So there is a mobilization argument in those Great Lakes states.
Yeah. I think you're right, though. The effect of election night looking better than it really turned out to be. The effect of the marquee candidates losing, which meant Republicans could tell themselves, yeah, we can hang on to these big states.
Right.
And
look what Trump
Florida
did.
is the classic Trump swing state, so we hold Florida, we hold North Carolina, and then we need to hold, a little bit in the Midwest, and Trump's got sort of magic powers there, presumably, with white working class voters.
And get New Hampshire back because they won't bus in all those voters this time.
Yeah, right, and they don't.
Famous.
That's what I guess. Yeah, you don't see the sense of alarm. I guess I don't see the sense of alarm that I'd say if I were a political scientist talking to Republicans, I would say, look, have you looked at where this is going?
Yeah.
Young voters and minorities, and they're more of each coming into the electorate. This is untenable.
What the Dem consultants say, I say, you guys are going to go identity politics and reelect Trump. And they're going to say, no, the data is sliding so far against Trump, and he'll only get worse that we can actually even pull that off.
Right.
And they might be right.
Right.
So, but nobody in the party, again, I always use the analogy of mathematicians versus priests. And we mathematicians were discredited in 2016. No way Trump can win. He's going to lose by 4 million votes. Well, lost by 2.9 million, and he won. So the priests said, tomorrow there will be a miracle. The water will rise, a golden bridge will be built, and we'll do it. And they did it. Right. So now the priests have a lot of grip in the party.
Yeah, that's a good way of
And
putting it.
we mathematicians are out. But don't you understand? Take a look at the math in Bucks County. And they're like, yeah. Take your computers. And
2018 was sort of...
It was a mathematician win.
But Trump wasn't on the ballot.
Yeah, and all you got to see is one miracle, and you're very sheepish about betting against the priest who pulled off the miracle.
Yeah.
So it's going to take it's going to take a very bad year to get the mathematicians back, or we get to go conduct the experiment this time with Trump, and probably, not certainly, but I'd bet money would get clobbered.
Yeah. I guess Mueller is a big variable. I mean, if he really has stuff that leads to impeachment, that's a whole different feel of 29, at least to impeachment proceedings or consideration. That's a different feel for 29 than if basically he comes up short on that. I mean, if he just honestly doesn't find real collusion or real obstruction. If he doesn't find it, doesn't Trump just declare total vindication?
Yeah, and he'll get a comeback. The media will say Rasputin's done it again.
Right.
He was right about Mueller. They didn't have anything. Look at that. Eric Trump has to pay a fine.
Right.
Trump, Superman, does it again. And so it could work the opposite way. And if the Dems go impeachment crazy, that's risky.
Yes.
Because then the Boston Red Sox are trying to put us Yankees in jail just for winning the game. And that'll lead to, I'm not of the theory that the Democrat impeachment thing is a smart move for them at all, but it'll be hard for their grassroots not to be demanding it.
If Mueller
has something real.
In between, kind of, where it's... Yeah.
The Democrat grassroots energy, I can't go to a dinner party in L.A. without having some perfectly nice, sane, real-world job Democrat grab a napkin and sketch an arrow diagram about how Putin mind control, it's just the conspiracy stuff is just as kooky on their side. And impeachment is, they think, the only answer for that. I think politically it's a trap for the Dems.
So you think that really does drive things over the next year and in the primaries?
Well,
the combination of loathing and hatred of Trump, not whether it's reasonable or not, is another question, and genuine fear of what he's doing to the country, and the natural pull on the Democratic side of identity politics, and just progressivism on a lot of issues, all combined.
It's a herd, and if it runs, it's hard to stop. Now, somebody with superhuman communication skills, a Mitch Landrieu, could, I think, communicate something about don't impeach, kick his ass.
Right.
And then put him in jail later. Right now, win the election, and you put that energy into something else. What you can't do is deny the energy.
They did pretty well in the House elections.
Yeah.
I mean, they had a big turnout for a lot of fairly moderate Democratic candidates, especially women in Virginia and elsewhere.
Yeah, no, and they nominated some pretty good candidates that fit in the House, that fit districts. So they, and if you look at the total turnout, it's off the scale compared to a normal midterm election. It's going to be probably 20 million higher.
Yeah,
where it's still counting.
Yeah, a little more actually. Yeah, so mobilization can support candidates who aren't themselves, wildly out there in terms of progressive.
I think Trump's the mobilizer. Anybody who told you it was Democratic turnout technology that did this, turnout is, more money has been blown on turnout. People either vote or they don't, and they make that decision based on the messaging of the race and how involved they are. And this was a race because of Trump and the passion that brought people to vote who don't normally do it. And it wasn't they got an extra robocall. You know, that's why I'll tell you, I made a bet with my brother who lives in Atlanta, who's an independent swing voter. When I saw Oprah, who's wonderful, maybe she runs for president, she'd be extremely formidable. But when I saw Stacey Abrams close the race with Oprah and with President Obama, I made a bet with them that Kemp would win. And I'm not a Kemp fan, by the way. I
pretty bad.
Bottom of the barrel in the Republican Party. Totally. I don't like her ideology, but I could have slept okay if we abandoned Georgia to socialism for a few years. But closing on mobilization in a state where every African American knew the stakes, instead of going for suburbanites who are a little nervous, was a massive mistake. And in otherwise, I thought very good Stacey Abrams campaign, but you don't close on that in the South. And I talked to some Democrats afterward, and they're like, they should have kept Oprah there for 3 days, learning exactly the wrong lesson.
So that's the other question. I mean, whatever lesson Republicans have or haven't learned, have the Democrats learned the lesson that, which I think would be correct, and I think is what you've been saying, you get the mobilization anyway with Mitch Landrieu. And you don't have the downside of Kamala Harris or someone more left-wing or someone more
Well, the problem is this takes
edgy,
over. Mobilization is bad messaging. It's very good organizational politics. And if you have a good democratic message, you can mobilize. Obama was a genius at it. He ran a mobilization campaign without ever needing to talk about mobilization because the messaging was so powerful. And Hillary made the same error, I think. If I had seen another commercial, and I say this as somebody with a young daughter, who would be very happy to see a woman president, particularly a conservative one in a Thatcheresque way. But all our liberal friends in L.A. were giving my daughter, when she was born, gifts for her future library, and it was all Happy World and Supergirl stuff. I gave her the Thatcher biography, which I look forward to her reading.
That's good.
But if I saw one more commercial of a young, doe-eyed 11-year-old girl staring up at Hillary, I would have blown my brains out because they got all that for free. You know what I mean? That was built in. And the messaging is about accretive stuff. But for some reason that...
Well, but also the actual voters may want to just make history, not win the election. I guess that is an interesting question.
And that's normal. I mean, I get it. I would be for making history. I mean, I am. But politics is a hard, practical business. And the worst you can do is surround your campaign with people who look at you as historic, because you got to have somebody in the campaign with a strong voice who represents the voters you don't quite have that you can get. I think Hillary's clique around her was very much into the crusade, and they forget about people who bend metal for a living in Macomb County, Michigan, who had other concerns than the bathrooms of North Carolina. Well, Trump just instinctually, he's never been out of his bubble forever, but he instinctually kind of got all that. She didn't.
So on either side, if they called you in, one of the top Democrats, and so what do we have to do to win both the nomination and the presidency? Any striking, any?
Yeah, it's hard because I spent all election night yelling at the TV because as much as I hate Trump, I'm not a liberal. I think about, okay, we get rid of Trump, so now we get to live in Britain in the 70s under Labor for a while. The policy is so awful, and it hurts the people they want to help.
Could they reassure people? I mean, on economics, could they?
Yeah, look, I think the formula
is... Could one of them pull a kind of Bill Clinton sister soldier moment and sort of show that he or she is not simply trapped by the left?
Well, I think there's
anti-political correctness.
That's Bloomberg's play if he's in that primary and decides to make it a two-way referendum on him and grab 40% of the vote, which is smart but painful. But no, I think it's middle-class economics and change. I'm a cyclical guy, so if you believe on that, Trump is incivil, loud screaming incompetence, strong competence, opposite of Trump, not so much anti as opposite. I think there's going to be a market for that. That's why, again, the strongest Republican candidate, if there's a meltdown, is Romney.
So let's talk about the Republicans then finally. Yeah. So, I mean, what about the Republic? You could argue generational change. A young, fresh face could be effective against Trump in New Hampshire, in Iowa, New Hampshire. You could argue, competent experience, which probably takes you a little bit to an older candidate.
Right.
What's your view on that?
I think, and I remember our electorate's a little older, a lot older. One of our challenges. When the Republican Party is on the march, it's one step at a time. If they really wanted to screw us, the Democrats should outlaw used tennis balls. We'd be in real trouble. So, but yeah, if the Trump thing, if Trump were really wounded and there was room for a real primary, I think a couple people might jump in, which is a problem. But I think one could be a Romney-esque, all right, time for a grown-up, enough of this, end the nightmare. Let's get back to worrying about the deficit, free trade, strong defense, the Atlantic Alliance.
Could that be Romney himself?
Yeah, I think Romney would be the strongest. I don't know if he'd do it or not. I've encouraged him to, and he's very patient and smiles. But right now he's focused on what he ought to be focused on, being a senator. And the other would be young, fresh, new. And a movement guy, Cruz type, might try too. Say this was a betrayal of conservatism. That's why I didn't really endorse him. We learned from his successes, and we're not going to repeat his mistakes. Some shtick like that. So all the wings of the party might go for the jump ball. But I just think on the cycles, if you look at it, it's kind of unfair to simplify it this way. But you had George H.W. Bush, the ultimate gentleman, war hero, expert on world politics, but the country saw him and he, couldn't figure out a supermarket scanner, allegedly. Right. So, he doesn't understand us. So we went to the trailer park and found Clinton, who totally understands us, in fact, a little too well. So then we had to clean it up again. We went back to the Bush dynasty for good people and honor and dignity back to the White House with George H.W. And then people started thinking he wasn't smart because he couldn't put an eloquent sentence to look at me, I just did the same thing. I'm an idiot too, I guess. Couldn't put an eloquent sentence together. Unfair, but perception's reality. So we got the law professor, the genius from Chicago, the most eloquent guy ever. And then it turned out he was too weak, so we got the guy who, taught Gary Busey how to work a snow cone machine on The Apprentice, who was Mr. Blow It All Up tough guy. Right. But now maybe it would be time to go to the opposite of that. Particularly in a general election, I think, but potentially in a primary. A grown-up, and the best grown-up we've got is Romney. But young, fresh is, there's power there too. I don't know if Marco's still young, fresh, but he might try.
Not. And you could have different. I was struck when I was in New Hampshire. Of course, everyone in New Hampshire is a total political expert, and they all tell you.
You have to pay attention to them though, because they're voting.
Totally. Here's how it has to work, and then they give you the most complicated scenario for how to defeat Trump, which is not
professional voters.
Yeah, and. So one of them was, you got to do it in 2 or 3 ways. The first guy in is going to get slaughtered, so you just send your Jeff Flake, as if one could control this.
Right. Exactly.
Jeff Flake, you're the sacrificial lamb. You're the first over the trenches to see exactly where the fire is coming from.
Right. But your corpse is going to give us the...
Exactly. It's going to give us the coordinates for the next guy. There's a lot of that kind of talk.
Or don't miss the Portsmouth Lincoln Day Parade. That's the dinner.
In New Hampshire. Yeah. But having said all that, there was a lot of interesting talk and a lot of actually differing views. Do you need to go early? So let's say one of the Republicans, I don't know, Kasich, Flake, whoever, Sass calls you in totally private. Let's say Sass, someone who's not been in the news. So let's just say Sass and hasn't talked that much about it even. Okay, I'm seriously thinking of doing it, Mike. What do I do? What do I do in January, February, March? What do I do in April, May, June? Yeah. What does my 2019 look like if I want to take on Donald Trump?
I would say first you should run an extremely liberated campaign without any fear because you're going to lose. So once you get your head around that, you're truly dangerous, which is true in politics. Most people run trying not to lose and go nowhere. Two, I'd say you're not going to shame him out, but you got to break through with an early win to get a platform to go after him with message, and that means Iowa, New Hampshire, probably New Hampshire. It's the most fertile ground. And I think just complaining about Trump's behavior, which is built in, is not the way to go because I think you get all that for free. Instead, you try to basically run as a return to conservative normalcy and as a winner. What breaks Trump's back is not that he's crazy. They bought into that. What breaks his back is that he is a suicide pact for the reelect. We're going to lose the Senate, and we're going to lose the presidency, and we're going to live under the worst liberal decade of American socialism in our history. And the only thing standing between us and that is Admiral X or Flake or Cork or whoever it is.
Right.
And it's a hard sell because while they smell the weakness of Trump, They don't know that Jeff Flake's a winner because he says he is.
Right.
He can talk about the principles, the Reagan-esque principles, and the opposite of Trump and all this stuff. But the only way to prove that is start beating Trump. Yeah. So there's a chicken and the egg problem that's really, really hard.
Yeah, I've been struck by that talking to people.
Yeah.
But I guess you just have to go to Iowa. I think it is very, very
You beat him, make him a loser.
lopsided
you beat him.
in terms of the importance of the first two states, though. Sort of the opposite of what you're saying about the Democratic Party in a certain way. I mean, it's if you don't beat him in Iowa and New Hampshire,
no, there's no platform,
right?
Yeah. And you don't have the resources to go forward anyway. You gotta kind of look through, and you got to beat him in California. That's the backbreaker, and California's moved up.
Right. And Iowa, since we did Defending Democracy Together, did some polling in Iowa and New Hampshire. Trump's more popular in Iowa than he is in New Hampshire among Republicans, but the actual would you consider an alternative to Trump number is about the same. Yeah. Iowa's a little more of a primary than people realize now. It's not a real caucus, you know. I mean, the turnout in Iowa is still pretty high.
Yeah, it's a tough world, and it's extremely expensive to play there. My view is, and this generally doesn't work, but we did it with McCain in 2000, and I was the big pusher of it. If you're the little guy and you beat the giant in New Hampshire, nobody cares if you weren't in Iowa. And it gives you the time to actually do New Hampshire right.
New Hampshire voters don't care that you weren't in Iowa.
No. One of the best secret New Hampshire slogans is screw Iowa.
Right.
I'd much rather be second in Iowa, first in New Hampshire.
They told me that 8 times that day and a half I was there. Iowa grows corn. We grow presidents.
Right. I'll believe
I, of course, said actually
the
person who's won Iowa has more often won the presidency than the person who's won New Hampshire in recent.
You know why that is?
Obama in 2008, Bush in 2000, et cetera.
Ideologically, Iowa is starting to align more with South Carolina, which has become a hugely important part of the process. The new wrinkle is California.
They don't like hearing that Iowa's a better predictor than New Hampshire, which I believe is empirically now true.
But if you're a non-Trump candidate, because New Hampshire, the independents can vote, you have a much better chance of beating Trump in New Hampshire than you do in Iowa.
And you think California moving up means South Carolina doesn't then knock you out when you presumably lose South Carolina to Trump?
Yeah, but losing South Carolina is anthrax for you in California. Remember, California's a closed primary. So the idea this is squish land out here, it's not Iowa or South Carolina, but it's not New Hampshire either.
Right.
And it only costs $5 million a week to be on television. So it's hard. Right. It's hard. That's why you look at the people
here, if anywhere, since we're in California talking, I should make clear, I mean, they should see how Trump has just destroyed the party. He was not in great shape anyway, God knows.
I would think you go around Orange County now, which is now, wiped out, you do hear some grousing. And but the problem is when you lose, you reduce down to your hardcore, and it's all priests. They're all like, we're up in the mountains because those damn mathematicians never let us talk about, landmines on the border instead of a wall, and we would have won. It's not like a reality-based losing team at that point. In fact, a couple of us were joking around, why don't we go take over the California Republican Party and make it an anti-Trump fortress? And we all just said, Christ, when we had Schwarzenegger's governor, I worked for him, we could barely bring him through there as the sitting governor of California. Aluminum foil hats. 80% of those delegates are super hardcore. There are only 1,000 of them or 1,200, but they're the 1,200 people, maybe there are probably 200 that get it, maybe 250. But you got 900 who are the 900 least able to get it people in California are entrenched there. So it's hard. It's hard. You also need a star. You need somebody who's got it. When Ted Kennedy took on Jimmy Carter, ran a terrible campaign. He had the Kennedy name, the big machine. He lost. When McCain took on the front-runner George W. Bush, he almost made it because he was a star. Reagan against Ford was a star. And right now, I don't...
McCarthy, in a weird way.
Yeah,
67, 68.
For Gene. Yeah.
Was kind of a star in a sort of
You need
odd
a
way.
star. And, we're still looking.
Okay, well, I hope that person... I hope they all call you in the next 2-3 months. You give them this good advice, and one of them emerges as a star. But you don't have to be a star ahead of time.
No, the next 3 months are not. It's not like time. Like, we have to get started in March or something.
Finally on time.
The battle to be fought between now and this summer is that Trump is political death for the party. Because when a bulk of opinion moves to that, which is the truth, by the way, and we just proved it. So we're in a much stronger position on that argument than we were before the election, when it was total Rasputin. Once that tumbler clicks, then the market of ambition and ideological thing and the specter of the Democrats after we watched Pelosi operate for a while, the case becomes more persuasive. But until you break that idea that Trump is invincible, and not only in the party, but especially in the general election, I don't think there's any space to operate.
And you don't think it particularly it's necessary for one of these candidates to show up in New Hampshire in March as opposed to
that's
May or July.
The biggest joke about New Hampshire is you're not there for the, Hopkinton Town Hall 8 months before. The hardest thing about running a New Hampshire presidential primary, I've done a couple of them, is you really find yourself meeting the same 2,000 people over and over and over again. And breaking that model is the key. That's why McCain did all the town halls. You got to get into the retail business there. And it compounds. It's like any primary. Most of it happens in the last 7 weeks. In some ways, the last 3 weeks. So no rush. Right now, the Rasputin thing has to go away. And people making calculations, and some of this in the Senate happens, that, my goodness, we're not going to win back the House of Trump. We could lose the Senate. President Elizabeth Warren. And we've got to break the thing among our grumpy old white guys, the bulk of the party leadership, that a Warren can't get elected.
Yeah.
I remember around McCain in 2008, I didn't work the campaign, but I stayed in touch with John, God bless him, and some of the leadership there would explain to me with scoffing, no way an African-American can win. I can't believe you work in politics, Mike Murphy. I thought, you idiots. Right. And here we are. So Kamala Harris can win. I don't think it's their strongest play, but she can. Against Trump. Trump might be the one Republican she can beat, and she and a few others could be the Democrat he might be able to beat. It would be a contest. If I were the Dems, I'd take the risk out and nominate somebody who's certain to win, but they don't. Their grassroots doesn't think that way.
And if they win, and this I guess would scare Republicans, they'll during the presidency they probably tip the Senate, which is only 52-48, 53-47, and then you have Democratic governance. Expanding the size of the Supreme Court. I mean, God knows what all the economic policies, all the political correctness.
Here's my pitch to you.
Unified Democratic governance in 2021.
Yeah. Here's my pitch to you for the Weekly Standard with good cover art. Welcome to the 2020s. And it's a whole episode about America as Britain in the 70s under Labor. Nationalized General Motors today to build the first eco-green, you can imagine.
It's good on that cheerful note.
Look, without a scary monster in the woods, or without a hanging in the morning, how do you get minds clear?
Yep.
Yeah.
Sound point. That's a good. That's almost Halloween. A bumper sticker. That's a bumper sticker, right?
Yeah, they're coming.
Mike Murphy, thank you very much.
Always fun to be on the Bill Kristol Revolutionary Resistance Hour here.
It's huge. Right?
Yeah, hey, proud to be here in our secret location.
They're all the senators and the governors and the possible other candidates glued to the screen. Every tip they can pick up from Mike Murphy. They're
I doubt that. I doubt they're like, who? That clown? Wasn't he in the 90s? But the reality is the reality. And the question is how woke we can get the GOP on this, or we get to repeat history. And the history of 2 weeks ago was not pretty.
Mike Murphy, thank you so much for joining me. And thank you for joining us on Conversations.